Hello friends. This is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto met his mother and discovered a new summon power in the Forest of Death? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, during the dangerous Chūnin Exams, Naruto's journey takes an unexpected turn in the Forest of Death. A mysterious encounter with his mother's chakra changes his destiny forever and awakens a summoning contract unlike anything the shinobi world has ever seen. Now, let's start. All members of Team 7 walked through a large hall with a large variety of seating before Naruto split off from his team as he found a door marked for ninja with a ninja animal. Naruto walked up to the door with a neutral face as he knocked on it, and after a few seconds, he heard a "come in" from inside. Naruto walked in and saw that the room looked like a veterinary office with a metal table used for checking on the animals. Sitting on a chair off by a computer was Hana Inuzuka, who was looking at a clipboard, but he kept his face natural and cold as Hana looked up at him, and he saw her winced when she looked at him. "I'm here for Kuno to have a checkup to see if she is alright," as Iruka did not know what to look for. He told her as Naruto placed Kuno on the table as Hana walked over. Hana looked over Kuno with eyes that showed years of veterinary experience, and Naruto tensed as Hana lifted a hand that glowed pink above Kuno. After a while, Hana moved her hand away before she looked up at Naruto. "She's healthy. I can do all her shots now so that she can build up her immune system," Hana told Naruto as he said nothing but nodded as Hana's face fell slightly. She had hoped that he would say something, but it seemed that his hate for her mother, and some of the members of her clan was still there. Hana walked over to a cabinet before pulling out small bottles and some syringes, and she walked back over to Kuno. Kuno saw the needles coming over as she steeled her nerves, as she knew that with Naruto in the room, he would not let Hana hurt her. While Hana gave Kuno the shots, Naruto looked around the room before he saw a photo on a counter. It showed his mother while she was in her mortal shell, Hana with 3 pups, a purple-haired girl with a katana at her side and a black-haired girl with red eyes. He then moved on. The next thing in the room was a picture of Hana, her mother and her little brother. As Naruto looked around, he failed to notice Hana looking at him as she moved on to the next syringe for the next injection. Both he and this little fox have a bond, Hana thought as she administered the next injection. "It's like how I'm with the triplets," she thought as she moved on to the next injection before she saw Naruto stiffen and his head snap to the door. Naruto narrowed his eyes as one hand slowly moved to the Yoto before she heard Kuno yips at him. And before she could ask Naruto what was happening, he spoke up. "We have another Jinchuriki here," Naruto said as Hana looked shocked. "How many tails?" she asked him as Naruto closed his eyes. Naruto said nothing as he closed his eyes before he let his senses and extended his reaches. In his mind, a black and white area of the tower formed. And from within the building, he saw countless people that were surrounded by cyan flames, which he knew was chakra, but 8 were not like that. Well, they looked like flames, but they were not cyan. Someone who had just entered had entered with navy chakra, then someone with midnight blue chakra and someone with pink chakra walked towards them, and another 2 walked toward them. One was green, while the other was silver. Above Hana and Naruto were 2 people, one with red chakra and the other with white. And then there was the final, who Naruto found was just outside the door and had yellow chakra. "All 9 of us are here," Naruto told Hana. As he opened his eyes, he slowly opened the door slightly to have a look out and found who was setting his demigod senses on guard. And he saw that it was the person he had met before the exams. It was a boy who had fair skin, green eyes, and short spiked auburn hair. He lacked distinctive pupils or eyebrows, but around his eyes, he had tanuki-like black rings, which looked like they came from insomnia, and he had the kanji for love eye on the left side of his forehead, and his hair was parted for it to be kept visible. He wore a black bodysuit with an open neck, t-shirt-like sleeves, and almost full-length leggings with a white cloth over his right shoulder and the left side of his hips and a wide leather band from his left shoulder to his right hip with which he carried his sand gourd and around which he wrapped his forehead protector. Naruto narrowed his eyes at him before he closed the door and looked at Hana, who was looking at him frightened, as was Kuno. You were my mother's student, and you went on a similar exam, right? Naruto asked her as Hana nodded, not getting where Naruto was going. Was it here in Konoha or was it somewhere else? He asked her as she looked confused. No, it was in Suna, Hana told him as Naruto nodded. Did she have to tell them ahead of time that she was going? Naruto asked her as her eyes widened, and she nodded. I'm going to need to ask Gigi about that then, Naruto muttered as he looked at her. They stayed looking at each other for a while before Hana realized that she did not finish doing the injections, so she finished them off before giving Kuno one last check and saying, all done for the rest of the day. She should rest, so no training with her for the rest of the day. Then, by tomorrow, she should be all right, Hana told him. Naruto nodded as he picked up his fox partner, placed her on his shoulder, and walked over to the door. When the exams are over, can we talk? Hana asked him as Naruto stopped by the door. I want to make it up to you for not being there when sensei was forced away, she added as Naruto said nothing before he turned to her as he looked her in the eyes as his rippled eyes looked deep into hers as if they could see her soul. All right, we'll talk then, Naruto said before turning around and opening the door. Just before he walked though, he heard a faint, thank you, before he continued walking out. As Naruto closed the door behind him, he saw that the boy he was looking at looked up at him before he walked off to find the Hokage. It took him a while before he found him. Naruto walked up to the room where he knew the Hokage was and knocked on the door. Entra, he heard the Hokage from within say as Naruto opened and walked in. The elderly man saw Naruto and gave the blonde a light smile. Naruto, what can I do for you? Hiruzen asked before he saw Naruto's eyes and looked shocked. Naruto saw that the Hokage was not alone in the room as he was with his old teammates, but he kept his attention on the Hokage. Gigi has any village said that their Jinchuriki is going to attend? Naruto asked him as he narrowed his eyes. His three teammates also narrowed their eyes as they turned to the man. Yes, Kumo, Kiri, Iwa and Taki have said that they were sending their Jinchuriki, Hiruzen said as his teammates looked at him but nodded. Why? He asked the boy he heard Naruto curse. Suna has their Jinchuriki here, Naruto said as one of the other people in the room sat up. Are you sure, boy? He said as he opened his eyes. Yay, and it's thanks to awakening my dojutsu. I can now sense chakra. And all 8 of my siblings are here, Naruto told him as Hiruzen stood up along with the others in the room. Do you know where he is at the moment? He asked Naruto, who nodded. Lead us there, he said. Naruto nodded as he opened the door as Anbu appeared around the Hokage. Naruto became cold when he saw Anbu with purple hair and a cat mask. They all walked out of the room with Naruto leading them slightly as Kuno got ready just in case something happened. They entered the lounge room and found the Suna Jinchuriki still sitting there. There he is, Naruto said as he nodded at the red-haired boy. So he holds the Aikibe, the elderly female said as Naruto nodded. Hiruzen told us about who your mother is and while I would not like to believe it, I must know, did she at least train you how to fight another one of your kind? She asked. Naruto raised a brow at her. Hiruzen seeing their brow. I believe she means Jinchuriki, he told him as Naruto of a face that said, oh, before nodding. Yay, mom taught me how to fight them. She also taught me her chains, Naruto said as a golden chain dropped from his fingers. Hiruzen nodded, along with the other 3. I'm going to have a talk with his sensei to see why, and then I would like to know about your dojutsu. But for now, return to your team, he told Naruto as Asuna Jonin walked in before spotting the Hokage. Naruto walked off to where he sensed his team before he found the room they were in and opened the door to find that Sakura was sitting on a bed with a happy face, and Sasuke was looking out into the forest broodingly. Sakura turned to him while Sasuke looked over at him before he turned back to look out at the forest. But when she saw the look on his face, her face fell. What is it? She asked Naruto, who looked at her. We're going to have to be more careful than before now, Naruto said as he walked over to a bed. 2 days later, Chūnin Exam Tower, Main Hall. All the teams stood in a room with the giant ram seal statue as the teams that passed were lined up next to each other, showing that only 13 teams had passed. All the sensei of the 13 teams were standing in position near the Hokage as he looked over the genin with, "Congratulations on passing the second exam," he told them as a woman with purple hair looked around and gained a slight smile. "We started with 78 teams this year, and Ibuki only got rid of 4 teams," she thought as she looked at the genin before a sadistic gleam formed in her eyes. "And I did say that we were going to thin the herd a bit, then get it down to below half, but this many," she added. The gleam in her eyes became dark. "But there are still too many," she said in thought. While the genin teams were waiting for the information, they each looked at the other teams, and genin, with Sakura, looked at some of the others in the room with her hand moved to take Naruto's, who gained a small smile at her. She smiled back as she wore new clothes as Naruto asked the dragon that made his clothes to make some for Sakura. Her clothes now consist of a red top with the same design as the upper half of her old dress, accompanied by black gloves, low heel, knee-high boots, black shorts underneath a short pink apron skirt, and pink elbow protectors. The cloth of her hitai was changed from blue to red. "What's this forehead is going for the dope?" a Konoha genin asked herself as she looked at Sakura and Naruto. "That means I can have Sasuke all to myself," she added while another person saw this, and her heart broke. "It seems that your team has made it," Kakashi, a man that looked like an older form of Lee, said to the man next to him. "I wonder how much of it was dumb luck," he added with a smile. Kakashi wore the normal Konoha uniform but had a mask over the lower part of his face with one eye covered. Kakashi said nothing, so the man continued, "It does not matter as my team is bound to knock your team off of this round," he told Kakashi, who was well not looking at him, "and the next round is about those that have the ability or those that do not, so will your team be able to manage with the heartbreak," he told Kakashi, who finally looked over to him. "What did you say, guy?" Kakashi asked as the now-named guy started to break down. A woman in a battle dress with long black hair and red eyes looked at the ninkin on her team, and she looked shocked. What got Akamaru freaked out? She asked herself before she looked over to Naruto and saw that the hateful glare was being from at her by him. She could not help but flinch at the clear as she remembered what her sensei had told her, and she felt a phantom pain around her wrists that had faint brogues on them. "You all right, Kurenai?" a man next to her asked her. She nodded but could not help but remember the talk with her sensei she had the day before. The day before. Kurenai walked through the tower as she waited for her team before she bumped into someone that she did not think that she would bump into here. Her old teammate Hana Inuzuka asked. "Hana, what are you doing here?" Kurenai asked her. Hana looked happy for a second before she looked across the room with a frown, and Kurenai looked over to see what she was looking at and found Naruto talking with someone she did expect to see. It was her sensei. "As that?" Kurenai asked as Hana nodded. "But she," Kurenai tried to say, but Hana looked away. "Sensei is not mortal," she said as Kurenai turned to her. "She's a goddess, a real one, and she is not happy at her son's treatment," Hana told her as Kurenai's eyes shot wide. Mom almost died. I heard that Mebuki Haruno's arms are broken, Hana said as Kurenai's shock slowly turned to fear. Me and Yugao got off lucky as she had other things to do. And we both have excuses, but we knew that we could have done something, Hana said as Kurenai's fear started to grow. What happened to you and Yugao? She asked as Hana looked at her with great sadness. Yugao was slammed into a wall by Sensei's chains, and from what I saw, if Sensei wanted, she could have broken her back, Hana told her as Kurenai started to shake. To me, well, I was bitten by our clan's Ninken until I said that I would marry Naruto and help him bring back the Uzumaki clan, Hana said with a sad smile. And do you know the sad thing? She said as Kurenai looked at her. We deserve all that punishment as we could have. We should have looked after him. And a small part of me hopes that I fail so that I can face my punishment, Hana said as Kurenai looked truly frightened. Is that so, Hana? The voice of their sensei said as Kurenai turned to the right and found her walking over. I will follow the oath that I made to you. But, Hana said as Artemis waved her hand waving it away. Oh, I know you will, as out of the three of you, you were the only one that could follow her word, Artemis said as Kurenai opened her mouth. But it seems that I should have taken Enko while I could have so that I knew that at least one of my students looked after my son, Artemis growled as her silver-purple eyes drilled into Kurenai's red. Kurenai froze while she looked at the woman. So tell me, Yuhi, where were you when my son was growing up? It better be good, Artemis asked her as Kurenai felt sweat roll down her neck. Kurenai held her hands out in front of her as if trying to calm the goddess down, but all that happened was she gave the goddess a target to wrap her chains around. Sense, Kurenai was saying before Artemis slapped her. Kurenai's head snapped to the side as tears formed in her eyes. As I told Azuki, you do not deserve to call me sensei, Artemis told her with a quiet voice, but they both heard it as it held authority. And I can tell you where you were, and that was Asuma Sarutobi, and letting him cheat on you, the moon goddess said as Kurenai looked over at her with wide eyes. What he do? She muttered as Artemis raised a brow at her. Please, Yuhi, he has 5 women on the go, and that is not to mention that one of them is a goddess, Artemis said as Kurenai opened to mouth to ask a question. I would never lower myself to a pig like him. But the goddess that he is sleeping with is married to my favorite half-brother, Artemis informed Kurenai as the black-haired woman did not want to believe it. Do you want me to show you? Artemis asked as Kurenai looked into the eyes of the goddess and saw that she held up a hand. And you can try to disperse this like you would a genjutsu if you want, but it will not work, Artemis said. Kurenai closed her eyes and nodded as Artemis waved her hand. A rainbow formed before the rainbow's center started to shift. And Kurenai moved her hand into the ram seal as a picture formed in the rainbow. It showed a man and woman on a bed, but the man drew Kurenai's attention, and she called out, Kai. But it did nothing, and she tried repeatedly but ended up with the same result as tears falling from her eyes. But she could not turn her eyes away as the woman mounted the man she was both with and in love with. Before you ask, no, he is not under any genjutsu or under the effect of charm speak, but he is doing this of his own free will, Artemis told her former student as she made the rainbow vanish. Artemis released her chain as Kurenai fell to the floor in a heap as tears fell from her eyes. Know this, Yuhi. You have not only failed me as my student, and when your parents passed, Minato and I looked after you, and so you failed me as your mother as well, Artemis told her as she looked down at the red-eyed woman before she disappeared. Hana helped pick Kurenai up as she walked to her vet's office so that Kurani could have some peace. After talking with Hana and Yugao after she arrived, she agreed to help Naruto and those in the Forest of Death Tower. They felt 2 small earthquakes. Present. Kurenai looked back at Naruto with a look that spoke of strength as he held his gaze, and her eyes turned from sad to something that Naruto could not place. The Hokage looked over the genin that was there, It's astonishing how many had passed, and what's more, a lot of them are fresh with hardly any training, he thought as his eyes met with Naruto's, who nodded at the man before he glanced at the Jonin. And I can see why the senseis put them forward, he added as the woman in purple hair stepped forward. Alright, listen up. Maggots Hokage-sama will explain the third part of the exams, she yelled out as everyone straightened their backs. They're all yours, Hokage-sama, she told him as she stepped back. Thank you, Enko, Hiruzen told her as he brought his pipe out. Now, before the third part of the exam starts, I want you all to know the specifics of how it will be conducted so that it pertains to the underlying purpose of the exam, he told them as he took a large puff of his pipe. Naruto narrowed his eyes as Sakura tightened her grip on Naruto. What do you think he means? Kuno asked Naruto as he looked over at her. Probably that we are showing each village our strength so that we both show good relations, and also that our strength should not be messed with, Naruto said to her as Hiruzen looked over everyone. This exam is to both show and grow bonds between both our nations and villages by conducting miniature wars between our nations, he told them as everyone bar the red-haired Sangenin looked shocked. And if you read out history, you would find out that it was only 17 years ago that we had just come out of a world war, Hiruzen said as people looked shocked at the knowledge that he was giving them. During the time of war, each village would agree that we would have a ceasefire so that we could all allow our genin to reach the next stage, so the Chūnin selection exams were created, Hiruzen explained to them all as they all nodded, but they all stayed quiet. And this exam is like the one that was held back then, with removing the weak ones from this exam, and by doing so you will bring honor to your homelands, Hiruzen told them as they looked shocked. Konoha Kunoichi could not help but ask, bring honor to your homelands. The third part of this exam shall be watched under the eyes of the many guests from other villages and the leaders from the other villages. That also means the royal family along with countless ninja from their villages, Hiruzen told them as they all nodded, and if any of the applicants show a great deal of skill, those nobles shall be quick to select the village to go thou with their mission, he added as people looked down at their poor performance in the forest, but Naruto tightened his grip on Sakura's hand as she looked at him as he gained a smile. And smiled back with a dusting of pink on her cheeks. So I want you all to know right now that you are all putting your hopes and dream forward in this exam from this point on. And so you must know that you must show the strength of your village while also strengthening the bonds we have with the other villages, Hiruzen told them as a sickly-looking Jonin stepped out. Hokage-sama, do you mind if I take over? He said as Hiruzen looked over to him with a nod before the Jonin turned to the genin. Hello, my name is Gecko Hayate. And I shall be the referee or the prelims that are going to take place, he told them before he coughed into his hand. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man but said nothing as Sakura looked at the Jonin and asked, what do you mean by prelims? Hayate looked over to her with a dark look in his eyes as Naruto covered his line of sight to her as he looked around and spoke. Now, while I don't want to say that the previous two exams were easy, but we still have too many genin here, he told them as they all looked at each other. And with the amount that we have right now, we want to cut you all down to at least half, if not only a small handful of you making it thou, Hayate told them as they nodded. He swiped his gaze over them again. Now then, before we begin, I want to know if anyone would like to step out now, he asked them. Two people raised their hands as Hayate looked at them. Names, please, he asked them. Kabuto Yakushi, a teen with silver-gray, said as Hayate nodded at him as he turned to the next boy with short spiked orange hair. Jugo, he said as Hayate nodded once more as they both walked off. Seeing that no one else said anything but Sasuke gripped his shoulder while Hiruzen narrowed his eyes at the Uchiha and turned to Kakashi. If he so much as uses that seal even a little bit, he will have his chakra sealed, eyes taken out and given to someone more fitting for them, sperm taken so that we can fertilize eggs, and then we will kill him, he told the man as Kakashi looked down. Are you sure, Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked his leader sadly, who nodded. Very well, he muttered as he saw Naruto and Sakura talking. And not looking at Sasuke. Why did they not care for their teammate? He asked himself in thought as Hayate looked around once more to see if anyone else was going to quit, and when he found that no one was, he started speaking once more. Now then, for this part of the exams it will be a one-on-one fight and the fights will be picked by a lottery, Hayate told them as they nodded. Open it, Anko said as a wall section opened to show a large screen. Names then started to be shuffled around before they stopped on 2 names. Sasuke Uchiha vs Yoroi Akado. Everyone started to walk nearby elevated walkways as Sasuke and Yoroi were left on the floor. Kakashi walked past Sasuke. Don't even think about using that seal or your Sharingan, or I'll be forced to take action, Kakashi told him as Sasuke looked at the man before nodding as Kakashi joined Naruto and Sakura. May the first match of the preliminaries begin, Hayate called before Yoroi formed a hand seal as chakra formed around one of his hands while Naruto narrowed his eyes and activated his Rinnegan. So that's what he is doing, Naruto muttered as Sakura looked at him with a raised brow as Yoroi threw shuriken at Sasuke, who deflected them with a kwani. What is it? Sakura asked him as Naruto looked at her with Kakashi looking over at them. That guy Yoroi is using a jutsu that can drain chakra, Naruto said as he watched Sasuke clutch his shoulder and fall to the floor. And while it is like my Gakido, Naruto was saying before getting cut off. He is tough. Someone finished as everyone, bar Sasuke and Yoroi, looked over to Artemis standing next to Naruto. Naruto looked to his mother with a nod. That right, Ka-san, Naruto said with a small smile while Kakashi's eyes shot wide. How is she alive? Is Minato-sensei alive as well? Kakashi thought, but she ignored Kakashi. Yoroi threw more shuriken at Sasuke, who was defenseless on the ground before he stabbed his kunai into the ground and used it to move his body. Gakido, Sakura asked the mother and son as Artemis turned to her with a thoughtful look on her face. Thanks to Rinnegan, Naruto has gained abilities with 7 primary abilities that are called the Rakudo no Jutsu, and it allows him the main 6 powers of the Rinnegan are called Tendo, Shirado, Ninjendo, Chikushodo, Gakido, Jigokudo and then finally there is the Gedo, Artemis said as Sakura nodded. Tendo allows me to use forces of gravity to a point with me either pushing something or someone away or pulling them or it in, Naruto said as Sakura gained a look of understanding. Like what you did to that Oto nin? She asked him as Naruto nodded. Naruto then held his hand out as one of his fingers shifted into a drill. The Shirado lets me turn my body into weapons, Naruto said as the drill was pulled back into his hand and his finger returned to normal. Ninjendo allows me to read minds and to remove souls from people with just a touch, Naruto told Sakura as she looked down at Sasuke with a contemplating look. Only a death god would be able to remove that soul from the Uchiha, Artemis said as Sakura looked over to her. Ninjendo, while it can take out a soul, it targets the entire soul and when a cured seal is placed on someone it messed with both the chakra and with what Naruto told me of the curse seal he has on him. They're a part of Orochimaru's soul within the seal, Artemis said as Sakura looked disgusted. What do you mean, sensei? Kurenai asked her as Artemis looked at her for a second before looking down at Sasuke. What mom means is that there are 3 types of curse seals. The first type is called the power type, which allows the user 4 times as much power as they would normally have, Naruto said as Hiruzen narrowed his eyes as the information was given. Then there is the sealing type, which is normally used to make the most powerful seals that are around, Artemis said as she looked over to the red-haired Sunanin. The Aikibe's sealing abilities are shown with this curse seal, she explained as Kurenai nodded. Then there is known as the slave type that does as it is said as the person who has been given that seal will follow the person as it grants them a small about power but acts like a drug that makes the person want more, but it tells the person to serve the one that placed the seal. Naruto finished as Artemis nodded at him as Naruto gained a smile. So Sasuke has a slave type? Sakura asked him as Naruto and Artemis looked at each other, conversing silently. While this was happening, Sasuke rolled forward and wrapped his legs around Yoroi's leg, and brought him down to the floor, took one of Yoroi's arms and started to break it, but then it gelled with chakra as he grabbed Sasuke's shirt. My chakra, Sasuke thought as Yoroi broke out of Sasuke's hold and surged forward at Sasuke. Yoroi gripped Sasuke's head as his hand once more glowed as the kunoichi of Team 10 yelled out, Sasuke. Naruto looked down at Sasuke, breaking the silent conversation with his mother. Yep, just like Gakido, Naruto muttered as he looked at Yoroi. And with the curse seal on Sasuke, Naruto said as he narrowed his eyes at Yoroi as Kakashi, Artemis and Sakura looked at him. What is it? Kakashi asked him as Naruto looked up to the other walkway, scanned the ninja there, and then looked back down to Yoroi. I think that Yoroi may know that Sasuke has the curse seal, Naruto said as Artemis narrowed her eyes. Why do you say that, Naruto? A boy with pineapple-looking hair asked as Naruto looked over at him. If I'm right about the curse seal, then Yoroi is making it so that Orochimaru has an easy way to get Sasuke. Shikamaru. Naruto told the now-named Shikamaru, who narrowed his eyes in thought before they shot wide. You mean that thing can tell when Sasuke is out of chakra and feed him more? Shikamaru asked as Artemis caught on to what her son was saying and nodded grimly. So that means that the drug part of the seal will slowly take hold of Sasuke, Sakura said as Kakashi narrowed his eyes at Yoroi. But how would he know about the curse seal? Kakashi asked his student. How did Kabuto know everything about Gaara? And how did he know that Gaara completed every mission without a scratch? Naruto asked Kakashi back as Naruto pointed to his red-haired son Jinchuriki brother. Kakashi clenched his fist and turned to the Hokage, who moved a hand. Sasuke kicked Yoroi away as the taller genin rolled away but stopped as he looked at Sasuke and got his hand ready before running. What do I do? Sasuke thought as he looked around before his eyes landed on Lee. That's it, Sasuke thought as he waited for Yoroi to get closer. Sasuke kicked Yoroi into the air with a powerful kick as Shikamaru's teammate was going ballistic over it while Naruto, Sakura, Lee and Guy had gone stone-faced. Isn't that? Sakura asked as Naruto nodded. What Lee used on Sasuke when they first met? Naruto asked her as Sakura nodded. Yep, and like his sensei, Sasuke used his Sharingan to copy it, he added as Artemis scoffed. It makes sense as there was only one Uchiha that never did that, and she was my best friend for a reason, Artemis said with Naruto nodding as Kakashi looked annoyed at what his students were saying. Lucky I don't have to worry about that, Naruto said as Sakura looked at him. Naruto moved his shirt and koso that hid part of his neck and showed a seal that was on the base of his neck. This is the Boshi Sharingan Fuin so that I can keep my jutsu to myself and eventually pass them down to my children, Naruto told Sakura who looked at the seal. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at the seal's name. What does it do? And why did you make it? He asked the blonde demigod, who did not look bored by the man. Artemis smiled at him. Why do you think he made it? It's to stop copycats like you. Database, she said before blushing as Sakura looked. So that's where you get it from, she muttered as Naruto, and before they could talk more, saw Sasuke move to behind Yoroi and place 2 fingers behind his back. Kage Buyo, Yoroi muttered as he looked over his shoulder at Sasuke. Sasuke got ready to attack Yoroi, but then the curse seal pulsed and flame-like markings started to flow out of it as Hiruzen gained a dark look and Kakashi clenched his fist. Yoroi and Sasuke started to descend to the floor as the curse seal marking moved over Sasuke. I wouldn't, the Uchiha thought as the markings stopped moving. Naruto and Artemis looked at each other after seeing that the markings started to crawl back. They sighed and looked at each other. I will not let it consume me, he yelled in his mind before Sasuke sprung into action. Sasuke moved his leg around Yoroi before kicking the other Konoha genin into the floor. Shishi Renden, Sasuke called out as he slammed Yoroi into the ground, knocking him out as Hayate walked over to Yoroi. Sensei, what is Sasuke's curse seal? Kurenai asked Artemis, who sighed. First, you still have not re-earned the right to call me sensei, Artemis told Kurenai, who nodded slightly before she looked down at Sasuke. And that boy has a mixture of two types, Artemis told them. The immortals, Naruto muttered as he looked at the curse seal. It's a mix between a strength type and a salve type, he told them as everyone looked shocked. Hayate named Sasuke the winner before Kakashi took him away so that he could do something to the seal while everyone, on their side, did not know what to say. Sakura turned to Naruto. Naruto, you were saying that your Rinnegan's abilities, Sakura said, trying to get everyone's minds off the information. Artemis smiled at the girl a small bit. From where we left off, the next one would be Chikushodo, which allows Naruto to summon animals that he makes in his mind, and he can control them, or he can summon people that he knows, Artemis told her as Sakura looked at him. So that, Robin, she asked Naruto, who nodded. That right, I can also summon people who I know, Naruto said as Sakura looked amazed. We already told you about Gakido, and after that is the final of the main 6 Jigokudo, which allows me to summon the King of Hell so that I can make people tell me the truth and heal people that are literally near death, Naruto told her as Sakura nodded. What about the final ability that you said? Tenten asked Naruto, who looked sad at her closing. It's called Gedo, and it allows Naruto the power to control life and death, Artemis said with a sad look on her face. He can bring someone back to life, use a body as a puppet, or just summon the soul of someone, she said as everyone looked amazed, but one of the genin saw the look both mother and son had. Why do you look like that? Sakura asked them as Naruto looked over at her. When I was fighting the Oto team, what would you say my face looked like? Naruto asked her. Sakura looked confused by the question but said, a warrior. Naruto nodded. Yay, and would you say that is my face whenever I get into a fight or when I'm fighting? Naruto asked as Sakura nodded. You see, it's a part of my Uzumaki blood, Naruto said as the names on the screen started to shuffle. All those with Uzumaki blood know deep down know that we are tools for the Shinigami. We are her will on the battlefield, Artemis said as she looked at Sakura. Looked shocked at her. I may have been put into a mortal shell, but I am still an Uzumaki, she told her as Sakura nodded. But why the look then? Shikamaru's female teammate asked them. As the Shinigami's tools and will, we do not mess with the power over life and death, Naruto said as she looked confused. The Uzumaki clan have a few ninjutsu that calls on the Shinigami for aid in sealing, but we give up our soul in the process, Naruto said as she looked shocked. And the Uzumaki does so willingly as we are her servants, so she blessed all Uzumaki with longevity and 2 masks, Artemis said as they looked amazed by the information. One mask is in the Uzumaki mask storage temple, while the other one was held by the head of the family, Artemis said as Kurenai narrowed her eyes in thought. Sensei, did your parents have a mask? She asked the goddess, who opened her mouth, but Hayate cut her off. Can Fu from Taki and Kiyomi from Nadeshiko come down? He said as 2 girls walked down. Fu was a tan-skinned kunoichi who wore an orange clip in her short, layered mint green hair that matched her eye color, which was also orange. Her clothing consisted of a short sleeveless white midriff shirt with fishnet armor underneath, long white armlets, and fishnet shorts with a short white apron skirt over it with her Hitai 8 was worn on her right arm, and Fu also carried a cylindrical object in red wrapping on her back. Kiyomi, on the other hand, had black spiked hair that had grown out to reach her mid-back with dark eyes and tan skin, and was dressed in a high-collar shirt and bike shorts with black sandals. Fu and Kiyomi looked each other down, with Fu smirking as Kiyomi was straight-faced as she looked at Fu. Naruto looked at the mint-haired girl with narrowed eyes as Sakura looked at him. "What is it?" she asked him as Artemis looked at her son. Naruto nodded at Fu, saying, "She is my sister of burden," and all three of Konoha-sensei's eyes shot wide, along with Sakura's, Lee's and Artemis. "How many tails?" Lee asked as he looked at Fu. 7. Naruto said as Hayate looked between both girls before he raised his arm. "May the second match," Hayate said as he looked at both girls. "Be gone," he called out as he brought his hand down. Fu jumped into the air as insectoid wings formed out of her tailbone, and she started to fly higher as Kiyomi looked up at her. "Let's get the ball rolling," Fu said as she formed the tiger seal and she breathed in. "Ninpo! Jishin Supika!" she called out before sending out a roar that made everyone cover their ears as Kiyomi covered hers. Fu charged forward forming the rat seal. "Cho Shaka!" she called out as a ball of lightning from above her head before it sends out a blot at Kiyomi. Kiyomi held her hand out as a puff of smoke formed within her hand before sending out a chakra slash. The wave of chakra moved through the lighting as Fu looked at Kiyomi with a wide smile. "I'm so glad that you're not a pushover," she told the other girl. "Well then, shall I step it up?" she asked as she raised her sword as everyone saw it. It was a moderately curved katana with a light purple edge and a distinct blue hamon with the appearance of flames with a golden tsuba shaped like a rounded cross pate, and the hilt was wrapped in purple. "That Kiyomi has some talent," Artemis said as Naruto nodded, although he looked at Fu. "Fu has also got some bite to her as well, but I can tell that there is something not right," Naruto muttered as Artemis smiled as she looked at her son. "What do you mean, Naruto?" Shikamaru asked the blonde going crimson-haired boy. "I don't know, but I can tell it's something," Naruto muttered as the tacky Jonin approached them. The Jonin was a young, quite tall, and slim kunoichi with fair skin, short light brown unkempt spiky hair, azure blue earrings, red lipstick, pupil-less black eye irises, short, thin, light brown eyebrows, and wore a white hairband over her head, holding the hair out of the way from her eyes. She wore a pink tube top with dark red linen, an open, light blue shirt, navy blue pants, and ninja sandals, and she wore her shuriken holster on her right leg. "I could not help but overhear what you were saying about my student," she said as everyone turned to her. "And I think I know what you think is missing about Fu," she asked as everyone nodded. "Yes, it seems that she has a good grasp on ninjutsu, as we Jinchuriki have almost unlimited chakra reserves, and by watching her flying and the muscles on her arms and legs, you can tell she is no slouch for taijutsu," Naruto said as he looked at the woman who nodded. "And with us, Jinchuriki Genjutsu is a toss-up," Naruto added. "You're right with all that, but you're wondering if she can use any of the abilities that her Biju gives her." The Jonin Naruto nodded. "She can use all insectoid jutsu," she told Naruto, who looked amazed. "So, while I can sense negative emotions, she can use a type of jutsu that I never heard of," Naruto said as Kurenai looked over at one of her students who twitched slightly. "I mean, sure that the Aburame clan from Konoha and the Kamizuru clan from Iwa," Naruto said as both of them turned to him. "Along with all the Iwa ninja. So you remember my clan then?" Kurenai's student said as Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I mean, if I want to become Hokage, I have to know what the clan do and what they are best suited for," Naruto said as Sakura gained a smile. "Take the Inuzuka and Hyuga clans are both good at tracking, but the Hyuga would be better at medical ninjutsu with their Byakugan," Naruto said as Kurenai's eyes shot wide before she looked over at her female student. While this was happening, Kiyomi's sword burst into flames as she looked up at Fu before she swung her sword, sending out an arc of fire that flew towards the flying Jinchuriki. Said Jinchuriki flew higher and dodged them before turning to Kiyomi, going through the tiger seal and then clapping her hands before she breathed out a powder that blinded Kiyomi. Fu then flew in close with a leg out and yelled, "Korogi Karu." The kick landed right in Kiyomi's chest as it sent her flying through the air and into a wall, where she fell to the floor. Hayate walked over and checked Kiyomi around before shaking his head. "Winner Fu from Taki," he called out as Fu landed, walked over to Kiyomi, and helped her up as her sensei smiled down at her. "Thank you," Kiyomi said as Fu took her to her teammates. Fu smiled back at her. "No problem," she said before walking to her team. "She did good," Artemis said as she looked at the green-haired girl walking over to her team. Her sensei nodded while everyone watched the screen as names flew by before they landed on the next two. Dosu Kinuta vs Shino Aburame. Dosu walked down as he waited for his opponent to walk down, and it was one of Kuranai's students. The boy had short spiked dark brown hair, black glasses that covered his eyes, and a sea green jacket with a high, upturned collar and brown pants. The two genin looked at each other, studying them while Hayate looked them both over and raised his hand. "Let the third match," he called out as both Shino and Dosu tensed before the man brought down his arm while calling out, "Begin." Hayate jumped back as Dosu jumped at Shino with his working arm, as Shino moved out of the way. Shino's female teammate looked down and saw that Dosu's other arm was just limply hanging there and swayed with each movement. "Why is he only using one arm?" she asked as she looked at Dosu while Naruto gained a smirk. "Naruto did something to it when defending me in the forest," Sakura said as Naruto's smile gained teeth. "You used Ryodangan against him?" Artemis asked her son, who nodded as she looked at Dosu. "I have to say I don't know whether to be proud that you made that technique or annoyed," she told Naruto, who laughed while Guy looked over to her. "I don't think I've ever heard of Ryodangan before," he said as Artemis looked over to him. "Oh, Naruto has made a taijutsu fighting style that he could pass on to his children one day and so that they could pass it on to their children and so on," Artemis told Guy, who looked amazed by what she was saying. Naruto gathered multiple types and fighting styles from the past, and he's slowly putting them together and then made Marukan, she added as Guy nodded as it made sense to him before he turned to Naruto. "Can you tell me about your Ryodangan?" Guy asked him. Naruto nodded. "Well, first, I aim at a nerve in the arm of my target along with the tenketsu before using Shigen to perceive the component. Both the tenketsu and nerve destroying it and severing on chakra going to the arm while using Zedan to add distance making sure that the Shigen travels through the arm," Naruto explained as Guy shivered at the explanation while Naju and Kuranai's Kunoichi student looked frightened. Shino jumped into his opponent and landed a solid punch before he flipped over Douse. "Hinata, did Shino get him?" Kurenai, another male student, asked his teammate as she turned to look down at Shino as the veins around her eyes bulged out. She looked at Dosu for a moment before she nodded before everyone else with a dojutsu turned them on as they looked over at Dosu. "Do you see it, Naruto?" Kuno asked Naruto from his shoulder. "No," Naruto muttered to her as he narrowed his eyes and looked at Dosu. "Lord Naruto, check out his head," Akamaru told Naruto, who looked over to the dog before doing just that. And Naruto did see that something on Dosu's Hitai-8 was a small bug. "Did you find it?" Artemis asked her son as Naruto nodded. "That is the skill of the Aburame clan," she told her son, who looked at her. "So when Shino punched Dosu, he sent one of his bugs over?" Naruto asked his mother. "Yes and no," she informed Naruto as Sakura looked at her. "You see, the Aburame clan have parasitic insects that feed on chakra, and they are called Kikaichu," Artemis told them as Shino and Dosu fought while Sakura narrowed her eyes. But wouldn't the Kikaichu turn on the Aburame? She asked the goddess. Artemis looked at Sakura out of the corner of her eyes before she returned her attention to the fight. If this Aburame was an infant, then yes, Artemis said as Sakura's eyes shot wide. You mean? She asked as Artemis nodded. From what Shibi Aburame once told me that when an Aburame turns 5, they are given their first Kikaichu queen, Artemis said as Kurenai nodded. He told me the same thing when I started to train Shino, she said as Sakura looked over to her before Kurenai turned to Artemis. Sensei, do you know how I could train him in ninjutsu without the Kikaichu affecting him? Kurme asked the goddess. Artemis narrowed her eyes in thought before she shook her head. Does he only use Kikaichu? Artemis asked as Naruto watched the fight as Shino sent out a wave of Kikaichu that turned into a clone of himself. Shino said that he wants to use more than Kikaichu and branch out to the other insects as well. Kurenai said as ideas started to form in Artemis' head. Well, first, tell him to learn how other insects work, how they hunt and make ninjutsu around that. Artemis said as Kurenai nodded, but the look on her face showed it was a struggle. How do I help him with that? She asked the moon goddess. Strangely, it was Naruto who answered. Well, strange to everyone except his mother, Sakura and Guy's teammates. To make a jutsu, you first need to know what type of jutsu it's going to be. Then you have to know when element it going to be or if it needs an element. Naruto started, not looking at Kurenai as he watched the fight between Shino and Dosu as both Shinos were attacking Dosu ruthlessly. Then you add hand seals if needed, but as we are talking about an Aburame, you will not need them, but you will need to know what insects will represent. Naruto added as people looked shocked, and Sakura smiled at the information. Is that how you made your shokugi? She asked Naruto, who nodded. Yay, and with how the Akamiki just uses the food that is eaten and turns into fat that can then be used to turn into chakra to make them stronger. Naruto said as he looked at while Shikamaru's teammate looked shocked at Naruto. Shokugi turns all food and drinks I eat into nutrients for my body before only half of what is left gets turned into chakra while the rest is the waste, Naruto explained as people looked shocked. At the same time, Shikamaru narrowed his eyes on Naruto. Are there any other clans you have taken inspiration from? Shikamaru asked Naruto as the blonde going crimson nodded. Yay! I make Omoi Rinku so that I can link my mind with another, and I based it off the Yamanaka clan's mental jutsu, Naruto said as Shikamaru's female teammate's eyes shot wide open with mouth hanging open. Thanks to mom's blood in my veins, hunting is like second nature to me and some of the dragons. I can summon them, and they act like the Kikaichu, Naruto said as Sakura nodded. Shikamaru and his team looked both amazed and annoyed at him. Prove it, the kunoichi said as Naruto raised his arm at her. Otatsu, Naruto called out as the arm he held out grew in size but stopped before it got too big. Naruto then closed his eyes and let out a breath as the arm sank back to normal, but only a few saw that his arm was shaking slightly. Sakura, one of the few who saw the arm shake, looked at him worried. It's still in the phases where my body needs to adjust to going big and then back to small, Naruto told her after seeing her worried look. Shikamaru's male teammate nodded as he looked at Naruto. It makes sense as I did the same. You need to do it 2 to 3 times a day for a few months before it becomes second nature and your body adjusts to only a part of your body growing, he told Naruto who nodded. Thanks, Choji, Naruto said as he made a mental note to do just that. Or just his Kage Bunshin to help him, but Artemis turned to him with a shake of her head. It needs to be you, not your Kage Bunshin, she told Naruto, who grumbled at her. Back down on the fighting stage, the Shino clone broke into a cloud of bugs as it swarmed over Dosu. Haijutsu, Mushidama, Shino called out. The insects gathered at once, forming a sphere around as Dosu tried to fight them off with his arm, but it was not working. As he looked up at Naruto, he saw his eyes looking down. And what he saw next to Naruto frightened him. It looked like a demonic visage as it looked over Naruto's shoulder at him. It was much larger than Naruto and possessed long, shaggy, white hair, from which two red horns protruded and purple-hued skin. It is draped in an oversized white kimono and carries a set of prayer beads. It opened its mouth to reveal sharp, jagged teeth and a long, almost serpentine tongue. And Dosu knew who that was. One of the 11 element nations gods. The goddess of death, Shinigami. And that was the last thing he saw before he was knocked out from chakra exhaustion from the Kikaichu as they moved away from Dosu, returned to Shino Hayate, walked over to Douse, and checked if the Oto Genin was still breathing. Once he was sure that Dosu was still alive, he stood up and held his arm out to Shino. Shino Aburame is the winner of this match, Hayate called out as Shino's team started clapping for him. Once more names started to cycle through the board as Guy turned to Naruto. So how many taijutsu and fighting styles have you trained in to make your own? He asked the younger ninja. Well, the ones that I put into making Marukan or boxing for fast fist work. Muay Thai for fast leg work as well as using my knees in fighting. Atsuryoku ten Kogeki to direct the attacks and fight some of the weak points, which is why I added Kai blocking and Tenketsu blocking strikes. Naruto started off with Guy nodding his head. That makes sense, Guy said to Naruto. When I found out that I wanted a taijutsu fighting style that either blocks the chakra or destroyed the target, I started to add more. Naruto explained to the man. So to work on my kicking power, I added Kuroishi no Waza, along with its two other forms, Jiao Kundu and Goken, and with arm power I was told about Mutoryu, Naruto said as Guy looked surprised. The fighting style the samurai uses? He asked Naruto, who nodded. That makes sense, as they are wealthy fighters even without their swords, he muttered as he waited for Naruto to continue. To make my body more flexible, I use the Nan no Kaizo. And for speed, I started to use the Zanzoken, Naruto told the man, who nodded. That also adds in the forms of Haki, chakra enhanced strength and all 6 forms of Rokushiki, Naruto added as Guy nodded. And then, before long, 2 more names were picked. Kegon of Taki versus Samui of Kumo. Kegon has short, brown curly hair and small black eyes. His outfit consists of a violet jacket, green inside, a black top, his midriff exposed, and dark pants. He also has 2 holsters attached near each of his elbows. He wears a blue Hitai 8. On the other hand, Samui was a tall, fair-skinned woman with a curvaceous figure who generally wore a stoic, aloof expression. She has blue eyes and straight, shoulder-length blonde haircut in an asymmetrical bob style. She wears a very low-cut outfit which displays her sizable cleavage, with mesh armor underneath, a short skirt and red hand guards, high boots, and what appears to be a modified Kumogakur flak jacket that covers her stomach only, similar to a girdle. And she also carries a tanto strapped horizontally to her lower back. As Naruto looked at Samui, he glared at her as Artemis looked at her son before she let out a sigh. Naruto, she said as Naruto turned to her. You don't have to hate them, she told him, but Naruto turned away as Sakura looked at him. Mom told me what happened to my clan, he told her as she nodded. Kumo, Iwa and Kiri although out the Second Great War attacked my clan's homeland, and during the last few days of the war, it then fell with only a handful of Uzumaki making it out alive, Naruto told her as Sakura gasped. Artemis looked at her son as Hayate started the match with sad but understanding eyes. Naruto, you have the Uzumaki clan scroll, so you know that there are more of us out there, she told Naruto as Kurenai looked at her strangely. I may be back in my normal form, but I am still an Uzumaki, Artemis told Kurenai who nodded. It's not just that, Ka-san, Naruto said as Artemis looked at him with a raised brow. Kumo kidnapped you when you were about to graduate from the academy as well. Naruto growled as he glared down at Samui with pure hate. Artemis sighed as she looked at him. You really are too much like me, aren't you, Databane? She told Naruto with a fond smile. Well, the only thing that you and Boss-san told me is that I look a lot like Tu-san but with whiskers. Datbeo. Naruto said back to his mother, who laughed at that as Kurenai looked at Naruto, shocked. You know who your father was? She asked him. Naruto nodded as Sakura looked at him confused. Konoha's mountain count to 4. Naruto told her as Sakura did just that before her eyes shot wide open. Yep. I was #1 most hated Konoha ninja. Naruto told her as a puff of smoke formed behind them, and it was Kakashi that appeared then behind them. Everyone there turned to them with a salute. Yo, Kakashi said. Shikamaru's sensei turned to him with a raised brow. Did you seal it? He asked Kakashi. Like Kakashi, he was dressed in the Konoha uniform but had a sash around with waist that had the kanji for fire. Huo, a pair of black bangles, and bandages wrapped around the arms of his sleeves, and he was a tall man, with brown eyes, olive skin, short black spiky hair, and a beard. And he was the man Kurenai saw when Artemis showed her boyfriend cheating on her. That I did, Asuma, Kakashi told the now named Asuma with an ice smile. Before Artemis could talk to Kakashi, Hayate called out, Winner Samui of Kumo. Everyone looked down to the floor to see that Samui had a sword to Kegon's trough, and he was holding his hands up as Samui stepped back. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at the sword, but the next two names were picked before he could say anything. Sakura Haruno versus Ino Yamanaka. Sakura looked shocked as Naruto looked at her, but she nodded at him. Ino is a fair-skinned woman of average height with light green eyes and long, platinum blonde hair with bangs framing the right side of her face, and her hair was hip-length and tied into a high ponytail. Ino was dressed in a purple high-collared blouse and matching apron skirt with bandages on her abdomen and legs, small hoop earrings, her hitai worn as a belt, and for a time, white arm warmers. Both Ino and Sakura walked down to the main floor, and they stared each other down as Hayate stood in the middle. Ino and Sakura looked at each other. Ino narrowed her eyes with a smirk while Sakura took a deep breath before tightening her gloves. Ino only needs line of sight, unlike her father, Sakura thought as she looked at Ino. Naruto looked down at Sakura as he turned off his Rinnegan and, with 2 gold coins in his hand, made a fist around it and placed his other hand over it. Hayate looked between both girls, raising his hand as Naruto closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Artemis felt divine energy appear from Naruto's hand as she looked over and heard him whisper the prayer before looking over to Sakura to see her adjust her stance. Who did you pray to? Artemis asked Naruto in his mind once Naruto opened his eyes and opened his fist to show that the olden coins were gone. Lady Taish so that Sakura can have good luck in this match and Lady Athena so that Sakura can make a good strategy, Naruto told her as Artemis. Hayate brought his hand down and called out, "Begone." As he said that, Sakura pulled out pellets from her pouch and threw them onto the ground, and once they hit the ground, they burst into pink smoke. The smoke covered both Kunoichi and Ino looked around, trying to find Sakura before she ran to where Sakura was. But Sakura was no longer there. Naruto looked down into the smoke and followed something through it, while Artemis did the same thing and looked at the same spot as Naruto. You taught her how to move silently, Artemis said as Naruto nodded but said nothing. Kakashi looked amazed that his Kunoichi student was going through this as he could not find her and to hear that Naruto had taught her this. Sakura moved through the smoke with her hair bending into the smoke as if she could see where Ino was, and with her fist back, she shot it forward into Yamanaka's chest, sending Ino out of the smoke. Ino flew out of the smoke skidding across the floor as she clutched her stomach. When did she get so strong? She asked herself in thought. Ino moved her feet to be ready to move as the smoke started to clear. But more smoke bombs flew out of the smoke and burst, allowing more smoke to form. Where did she? Ino started to say but was soon covered by the smoke. Shikamaru looked at the battle zone in shock at how the fight was going as Naruto watched silently while Artemis turned to Kakashi. What have you thought of her, Kakashi? She asked him. Kakashi turned to the moon goddess with an ice smile. Oh, nothing much, he told her. That does not answer the question, Artemis said as she turned fully to Kakashi. All you taught my son that was any use to a ninja was the Ki no Bori no Shugyo. So what have you taught her? She asked Kakashi once more, who looked at her in shock. Who told you that? Kakashi asked her with sweat on the back of his neck as he felt disapproving eyes from both the Hokage and his fellow Konoha Jonin. But it was not just the Konoha Jonin but the Jonin from the other villages. Naruto did, and when I secretly checked his mind and found that he was telling the truth, I wondered what you taught your team's kunoichi, Artemis said. Kakashi got ready to answer, but Naruto beat him to the punch. The same as me, he said to his mother, but did not see the look on Kakashi's face or the Artemis. Narrowed eyes aimed at Kakashi. Now why? Kakashi said before Artemis cut him off. Minato would be disappointed with you, she told him as Kakashi's visible eyes shot wide. I was unable to raise Naruto because of a law my bastard of a father had made, but you did nothing to aid your sensei's son, Artemis told Kakashi as the man felt that he was being stabbed. Asuma scoffed as the moon goddess turned to him. He's an Uchiha, he told the goddess as she raised a brow at him. He means that all Kakashi cares for is the Uchiha clan and would do anything for an Uchiha, Kurenai said as Kakashi glared at both of them, but they were not affected by the glare. Before Kakashi could speak again, Ino was sent out of the smoke again, but this time her feet were not touching the floor, and the smoke was dissipating again. She only has 3 smoke bombs left, Naruto muttered. 3 smoke bombs flew out once more, and pink smoke covered the area once more, and now she has none, Naruto said with crossed fingers. Ino landed on her back as she got up and looked around before pulling out a kwani and throwing it into the smoke. She waited and waited, and she looked into the smoke waiting for it to dissipate, and when it did, Sakura was not there as Ino looked around. People with dojutsu activated them, or in Kakashi's case, pulled up his Hitai 8, and they saw that Sakura was standing in front of Ino. Where is she? Shikamaru asked before a portion of dust was kicked up as Ino as soon punched them in the cheek. What jutsu is she using? Artemis asked her son as she saw Naruto gripping the railing. The Mujin Maisai, as the smoke bombs I made for her. A special blend of liquids, and one comes in contact with the air, it turns to smoke, Naruto said as Artemis looked amazed by her son. But she cannot hold the jutsu for long, Naruto said as he looked at Ino being pummeled by the invisible Sakura. How long can she use it? Artemis asked her son. Naruto looked over to his mother. From what we timed, she can use this jutsu for 2 minutes, Naruto told her as Artemis nodded. Sakura kept punching and kicking Ino around the arena floor while Ino tried to defend against the invisible opponent. She is hitting harder than normal. What is happening? Ino screamed in her head. Before Ino could punch where she thought Sakura was, she felt something hit the side of her chest, and it took her off her feet, and she felt a crack in her ribs before she was sent into the center of the area. Shikamaru and Choji looked shocked by the battle happening. How is Ino losing? Choji asked Shikamaru, who did not know. I mean, she's part of the Yamanaka clan, so how is she losing? He asked, but he did not get an answer. Being a part of a clan does not mean that you can win every battle, Artemis said as both boys looked over to her. When I was training my 3 students, Yugao Izuki was the best out of them and was the one that had beaten all others that she fought. And that meant those from clans, she explained to the boy. Asuma nodded as both his students as they looked at him. She's right, I fought her. And I was beaten black and blue and was lucky that I came out of that fight with my arm on my body, he told his students as Artemis raised a brow at him. Come on, she was trying to cut off my right arm, Asuma told her as Artemis rolled her eyes at him. My old teammate was not trying to cut your arm off, Kurenai said as Asuma looked over at her. Sensei taught all three of us how to use a sword, and she was not going to cut your arm off. She was going to dislocate your shoulder as she was using the back of her sword, Kurenai said, rolling her eyes as Asuma looked shocked. Naruto not listening to them. He kept an eye on the battle as he followed the invisible Sakura with his dojutsu, and he saw that the flow of chakra was slowly fading. She's about to become visible, Naruto muttered as Artemis looked at him before she looked down to see that he was right. Why, it's too early for her, Naruto muttered as he narrowed his eyes. He saw chakra coalesce around Sakura's right fist and start to resemble an animal's head. Tarakasaki-kun, Sakura called out as the chakra turned into a tiger's head and shot out of her fist at Ino as a beam. Ino's eyes shot wide as the beam hit her square in the chest, as she saw a new side of Sakura that she never saw before. Ino slammed into the wall behind her as she lost consciousness, and Sakura fell to her knees. Hayate walked over to Ino but kept his eyes on Sakura before he knelt down to check on the downed blonde, and after checking to see if she was breathing, he stood up. Winner of the 5th match is Sakura Haruno, Hayate called out as Sakura let out a sigh and started to fall back as she was out of energy. But before she could fall, she felt something appear behind her. She looked behind her to see Naruto with a loving smile as he looked at her. You did good, Naruto told her as he gently lifted her up as medics walked over to Ino. But next time when you need to finish a fight, don't use something as taxing as Ruoken, Naruto told her as he teleported back up to the observation area. I know, and it's called Tarakasaki-kun, Sakura muttered to him as Naruto placed her down gently on the ground. I thought that only a tiger could stand up to a dragon, Sakura told him as she saw Naruto's eyes fill with joy. Asuma soon appeared back with his team like Naruto did, but he had Ino in his hands as he placed her gently against the wall. Where did you see that, Sakura? Shikamaru asked Sakura, who looked over at him. For the 2 days before today, Naruto aided me in my training by showing me how to fight, but when he was training with his clones, I saw him using a technique that I made a version of, Sakura told him as she held right arm as it was shaking slightly. It seems that I was not ready to use it, she muttered as Artemis looked Sakura over. You need to train your strength more before you can use that, she told the girl who looked up. You just used chakra-enhanced strength, don't you? She asked. Sakura nodded as Artemis sighed. What? Sakura asked her. Naruto uses another fighting style called Gekijuken to form a base for him to use his Maruken, Artemis told her as Sakura's eyes shot open. And with him using the dragon aspect of Gekijuken to make Maruken, Artemis said as Sakura hung her head. It hurt my body as I was going against the dragon aspect, Sakura said as Artemis and Naruto nodded as Naruto rubbed circles into her back. Naruto, can you? Sakura started off as she turned to Naruto. Yay, I will, Naruto said as Kakashi scowled at his students. Why don't you ask me? He asked Sakura, who looked up at the one-eyed man with a raised brow. Why would I ask you when you only teach Sasuke? Sakura said as she looked at him. Kakashi blinked. I mean, Sasuke has learned how to use both fire release, and you started teaching him how to use lighting release, Sakura said as Naruto nodded. My summons taught me how to use one jutsu of each of the basic elements, and I taught Sakura how to use both of hers, Naruto said as he looked at Kakashi from the corner of his eye as the next two people walked down. The first was Yoroi's final teammate Masumi Tsurugi. Masumi's appearance was greatly concealed by the mask he wore around his mouth that hung around his neck and Hitai 8, which he wore like a bandana, and he also wore what team's clothing that consisted of a high-collared, sleeveless, purple shirt with a short-sleeved, white one underneath, a simple obi around his waist, purple pants, blue sandals and purple fingerless gloves, along with a pair of round-framed glasses. The other person was Fu's other teammate Yoro. He has short spiky black hair and small black eyes, with his outfit consisting of a dark violet vest with 2 scrolls attached to it, a light violet turtleneck, and dark green colored pants, and he wears a blue Hitai 8. But Naruto and Sakura did not care about the matches. They wanted to tear Kakashi a new one. And with the foreign ninja here, it added to the man's humiliation. Mom taught me most of everything that I know. Naruto started off the verbal attacks. The rest was taught to me by the dragons, but you have only taught me and Sakura how to work as a team. With only me and Sakura working as a team while your favorite student was doing none of the sorts, he added as Sakura nodded. And like always, you would play a blind eye. And when we were in Wave, you taught us the Ki no Bori no Shugyo. Not when we just came out of the academy like you were supposed to, Sakura said as Kakashi turned to her as he felt the eyes of the Hokage drilling into him along with Guy, Asuma and Kurenai's as well. And what had happened during the exam in the forest and Sakura realizing that she needed training, she came to me so that I could help her. And I did. And even though I did not mind that everyone here knows that she should go to you, Naruto said as Sakura nodded while Kakashi looked between his students. And let's not forget that Sasuke does not care for me or Sakura as he wants only to kill someone and would do anything to do just that, he added while Kakashi had nothing to say. Hiruzen hearing this and to say he was disappointed was an understatement. Kakashi, meet me in my office when these matches are over, he told the man as Kakashi looked over and nodded. And I was right. Minato really would be disappointed with you, Artemis said as Kakashi looked over to her and could see pure hate being aimed at him from the goddess. Even Rin and Obito would be disappointed with you as you said when you found out that Minato and I were going to have a child. You said that you would help them and teach them what they needed to know, Artemis added as Kakashi flinched at the names of his dead teammates. And from what most people did not see was that one of the Kiri Nin flinched at the name Rin. Kakashi had nothing to say as everyone turned back to the match to see that Hayate was calling the match a draw. Hayate looked at everyone as they all looked confused. Masumi was using Nan no Kaizo to make Yoro pass out from lack of air while Yoro was using lighting release to do the same. He told everyone as medics came and carried the 2 boys off the field. As the names started to shuffle once more, Kakashi looked at Naruto and Sakura as they talked about going out for food when the prelims were over. His mind was going over what both of them had said along with what Artemis had said, but for some reason, something was stopping his mind from fixing the mistakes. A picture formed in his mind, a 4-point pinwheel spinning as he blinked and shook his head before the image vanished as the next 2 names were picked. Chūnin Uzumaki versus Shikamaru Nara. All of the Konoha nin eyes shot to the board, with Artemis and Naruto being the most surprised as Naruto pulled out his clan scroll and opened it before he found the name and showed his mother. Karen has crimson eyes, fair skin, and the characteristic red hair of the Uzumaki clan, which she wears in an unusual hairstyle with her hair cut short and spiky on the right side, while longer and straight on the left side, and she wears narrow brown glasses, which have a serrated blade hidden in them, and her outfit consists of mesh shirt and stockings, a purple skirt, a light brown short-sleeve jacket with an orange stripe going across the chest, and black sandals and a Kusagakure Hitai 8 on her forehead. Shikamaru looked over to the girl he was fighting before he looked at Naruto. Is she? He asked her. She is my cousin on my mother's side, Naruto said as Sakura looked at him in question. I'll say in a bit, Naruto told her as she nodded. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes at what Naruto told him but nodded as he walked to the battle area. So how is she? Sakura asked him as Naruto turned to her. Is she from your uncle or from when she was? Sakura asked as Naruto nodded at her. Mom was one of 3 children that were the heir of the Uzumaki clan. Naruto told her as Sakura nodded along with him. Mom had a younger brother Nagato and a younger sister Rias, he added as Artemis nodded with her son. Kurenai turned to Artemis. I didn't know you had siblings. Sensei, she asked the goddess. Before I was in my shell, I only had younger twin brother Apollo. And when my bastard of a father put me in my shell, I had 2 younger siblings, Artemis said as she gained a gentle smile. My little brother was such a baby and would always stick to mom or me so that he could get away from the evil man, who was his teacher, Artemis said as Naruto smiled. What about your sister? Sakura asked as Artemis's face turned dark. The best way to put it. Nagato was the angle that always did as he was told and was sweet and a little wimpy, Artemis said as they nodded, not getting where she was going. Rias was a devil that was caused chaos and would once a week blow up a building just for the hell of it, Artemis growled as Naruto looked amazed. Shikamaru, who was taking his time getting down, hearing this, started praying that Karen was the daughter of Nagato. But his prayers were not answered by what Artemis said next. While her eyes are not the same as Rias's purple from our mother, she looks like a little Rias, the goddess told Sakura as Shikamaru reached the middle of the area. Karen met him in the middle with Hayate standing in the middle of him, but if you looked closely, you could see that he wanted to jump away, and those with sharp ears heard him say, not another Uzumaki. Naruto raised a brow at what he said as he saw Artemis crack a grin and chuckled at what Hayate said. Hayate raised his hand as he looked between them before he bought his cry of, begin. Kane pulled out a kunai with a paper tag that was attached to it before she threw it at Shikamaru. Shikamaru jumped back as the kunai landed in a line in front of him before they exploded, making a large cloud of smoke, and Shikamaru did the smart thing. And waited. Now of all the things that he expected to come out of the smoke, a golem of stone was not one of them. Shikamaru ducked under the fist that the golem sent his way as he looked it over with narrow eyes while up on the observation deck. Naruto was looking down at the fight with narrowed eyes. What is her plan? Naruto muttered as he looked into the smoke and tried to see what she was doing. If she is anything like Rias, she is going to use more explosions or other destructive things, Artemis said with a twitching eye. Sakura looked into the smoke as she looked where Naruto was looking but could not find anything. How are you seeing her? Sakura asked him. I'm not really seeing her. Well, not really, Naruto said as he looked over to Sakura, who looked confused. I'm using mantra's presence sensing to see through the smoke and find her aura, Naruto explained as Sakura still looked confused. You see, Naruto-san is using haki, and that is allowing him to use extranet abilities, and the one he is using is called mandra or better known as Kanbunshoku haki, Guy told Sakura as she looked to the older-looking Lee as the man's 3 students were doing the same, and with him using that type of haki he can see the aura of a person that is hidden in something, Guy explained as Sakura gained a look of understanding. On the other hand, Lee looked amazed. Can anyone learn this? He asked his sensei. Guy shook his head. Yes and no. Haki has 3 parts to it, Guy told his student, and when Naruto said that he has all 3, that means he is one in several million people born with this ability, Guy said as Hiswan nodded while Neji looked shocked. He speaks the truth as I only know a few men that had this ability that Guy speaks of. Hiruzen said as everyone, apart for Shikamaru, who was jumping from the golem and Karun, who was looking at Shikamaru with narrowed eyes. From Konoha there were both Hashirama Senju and the second was Minato Namikaze, Hirswan said shocked while everyone was amazed by that. What about from the other villages? Sakura asked as people from the other villages nodded. Well, from Suna, I think that Miyawa the 3rd Kazekage has this type of haki, and the current Mizukage Terumi has this haki as well, Hiruzen said as the Suna and Kiri ninja looked amazed by what he was saying, Both the current and third Raikage as well in Onoki the Tsuchikage has the Haoshoku Haki. The Hokage finished as Neji was having a mini breakdown. Do you not have this ability, Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked as he looked shocked that Sasuke did not have it. But that was nothing new. But he shook his head. No, I only have Kanbunshoku Haki, and the ability we were talking about is hereditary. And from what Hashirama-sensei told me, he got his Haoshoku Haki from his mother, Hiruzen said as Neji looked over to Naruto. Then what Sakura said started making its way through Neji's head. Konoha Mountain. The Hokage Rock. And he said count to 4. That means that his father is. Neji said as he looked at Naruto, and when his mind took Naruto's whiskers away from his face, he looked like a younger Minato Namikaze. Not aware that Neji's world was crumbling around him, Shikamaru started to use his plan. He knelt down at the golem, turned to him, and formed the rat seal as his shadow shot out and attacked the golem. Shadow imitation complete, Shikamaru said as he rose to his feet and moved his body to face the wall. The golem followed his movements, and Shikamaru and the golem clapped their hands. And while Shikamaru's clap did nothing, the golem, on the other hand, blew away all the smoke that the kunai was making as Naruto took a good look at the kunai and saw that the tag that was connected to it was not explosive tags. Smoke tags, Naruto said as everyone looked at him. That is what Karen is using. Smoke tags that allow for a ninja to work without being seen or having to go face to face, as they can work in the background silently, he said as Sakura looked amazed before looking at Naruto with puppy dog eyes. Sakura, no, I know that you want to have something that can help you when you are going medical ninjutsu, but you must do them for yourself, Naruto said, not looking at her as he thought. No, I will not look. He would not look. He would stay strong. He would not look. He saw pink in his periphery. He turned. He looked. He broke. Fine, I'll make them for you, Naruto said as he hung his head in defeat. Choji walked over and patted Naruto's back as Sakura kissed his cheek. And Artemis laughed. Oh, you are too much like me, Databane, she told her son as Naruto looked over. When your father wanted help with Fuinjutsu, he would be just like your girlfriend here, Artemis said as Sakura looked shocked but red in the face. Karen looked over to her golem and released it after seeing that it was no longer under her control. So do you think you can do that again? She asked Shikamaru, who raised a brow at her. Did you not that the Uzumaki clan have chakra reserves more than a kage when they reach 13? Karen told Shikamaru, whose eyes shot wide as he glanced at Naruto, who nodded. Your clan sounds troublesome, Shikamaru said with a sigh as Karen narrowed her eyes. Look, I don't want to fight a girl as I don't think that it's right, Shikamaru said as he heard growling from above him. And he dare not look as it was from both the goddess and her demigod son. While the other woman was not any better as Sakura pulled out a kunai and started to engrave it. Kurenai was planning to use a genjutsu on him. Tenten thought that he would make a good training dummy. Anko was planning to have her snakes play with him. And Watt was only Konoha Kunoichi as the others were planning other ungodly things for him. As she was pure, Hinata's thoughts were nothing like them. And why is that? Karen asked him, a dark look in her eyes, and that was when Shikamaru knew he was up. But he could not stop his mouth. All kunoichi are weaker than the shinobi, he told her as his eyes shot wide as he felt the killing intent from the females around him, along with Naruto. I'll turn into a jack, Artemis said before seeing a dark smile form on Naruto's face. Oh, I have a better idea, Naruto said as most of the people, read Kakashi, Asuma and Kurenai's final student, stepped away from him when they saw the smile. I'll turn him into a woman, and you curse him, Naruto said as Artemis gained an equally dark smile on her face. I like your plan, she said as Asuma looked shocked before bowing his head along with the other two men that stepped away. And all three of them said as one, better him than me. Shikamaru felt a chill go down his spine as he looked over to his sensei to see that man bowing his head and the dark look on the faces of the women. He then turned to Karen, whose face looked shadowed by her hair, and her crimson eyes glowed eerily as Shikamaru prepared for her attack. And he was bricking it. Karen shot at Shikamaru with lightning speed as the shadow user dodged slashes from Kunoichi's kuni before he formed the rat seal once more, as his shadow shot forward once more and connected to Karen this time as she stopped in place. Shikamaru, seeing that he had caught her, sighed. Shadow imitation completes, he said once more before both Karen and Shikamaru started to walk over to the other side of the room. And with how Shikamaru had them placed, Karen was just in front of the wall while a few steps away. What are you going to do, you monkey? Karen growled at him. 1. I'm a Nara, so I'm a deer, Shikamaru said as he raised his head back as Karen did the same. And 2. I'm going to do this, he told her as he brought his head forward fast and hard. And with Karen copying everything he was doing, she headbutted the wall hard and knocked herself out when her head met the wall. Hayate walked over to Karen and checked on her before calling out, "Winner Shikamaru Nara," he called out as Shikamaru nodded and started returning up. Shikamaru made his way up the sights as Naruto looked over to him, and so he took a deep breath and felt for the magic that came from his mother's godly blood that flowed within him while keeping his target in his sight. He called on the feelings he used when changing his student, follower and little brother in all but blood from male to female. And there he felt a tug in his fingers, as if pulling an arrow across a bow. With the index, middle and ring fingers of his right hand curled, he felt the magic form, and he took aim at Shikamaru, who was walking over to his team. And when he was close, Naruto's 3 gingers shot out as if they had just shot an arrow, and the magic flew and made its way into the boy. Shikamaru felt something happen to him as he felt a tingling sensation wash over him. As he looked at his hand, he saw changes starting to happen. But we can get back to him. After a while Shikamaru felt funny as the next 2 names. Takiwa of Nadeshiko Village vs Kankuro of Suna. Kankuro wore a bunraku puppeteer's costume. A black, baggy, full-body suit with a red and yellow circle on the front. He also wore a black hood covering his head completely, with cat-like ears and his Hittite on his forehead. Kankuro face was covered in purple war paint makeup, and he had 4 triangles with 1 on each cheek, 1 on his forehead and the last on his chin. 2 jagged lines that come down from his forehead to the bridge of his nose. He also had it around his eyes and mouth. Takiwa, on the other hand, had an imposing figure, easily towering over Kankuro and most of the others that were in the exam. She had a slender physique with a very angular face framed by her short brown hair along with a dark shade of red lipstick. She wears a short, backless, red, full-body suit over mesh armor, a pair of arm-length gloves, a light orange sash, and a long blue-green apron open in the front and wears bandages on her wrists, covering all of her right left as well as her left thigh and leg, and she carries an extremely long and thin katana strapped to her back. As they both met Hayate in the middle and then started the match, Takiwa looked over at Kankuro with a raised brow. "Are you by chance a puppet user?" she asked, catching the boy off guard as Kankuro nodded. "I see that. I must concede this match as I do not believe I would win this fight at my current level against a puppet user," she said to Hayate, who looked shocked before he nodded and declared Kankuro the winner. "Smart," Artemis said as everyone looked at her as the 2 genin walked back to their respective teams. "Not many close-range fighters would attack a puppet user," she said as most of the jonin nodded. "Puppet user?" Naruto asked his mother as she looked at him. "The best way to put it is you with Shirado but not alive and made of wood," Artemis said to her son as Naruto's eyes shot wide. "Yep, I fought a few, and they were no joke," she told her son, who nodded. Before long, the next 2 names were picked as Shikamaru's body changed. His figure started to become more like Ino's, and his hair became softer along with his skin. His mesh shirt gained 2 mounds over his chest. And the 2 names that were picked were Tenten of Konoha vs Akatsuchi of Iowa. Both people walked down as Asuma and Choji looked at Shikamaru with wide eyes as they saw him become her. They looked over to see a smiling Naruto as they put 2 of 2 together. Naruto, you did this? Choji asked him as Shikamaru looked over to Naruto, who nodded. Why? He asked him. Why, our dear friend Shikamaru decided that he had to say that all kunoichi are weak, and so I decided that he should feel that weakness, Naruto said with a smile that did not reach his eyes as Choji nodded. Artemis walked over to the boy-turned-girl and whispered in his know her ear, and as a goddess of maiden girls, and I have a group of female hunters, I decided that you will not turn back to make until you know what power a woman really has. She whispered his as her eyes glowed as Shikamaru nodded. Tenten went down to the bottom, not before she unsealed a katana and handed both her scrolls to Lee, who was shocked. It was where she met Akatsuchi, who was also standing and walking down. Akatsuchi is a large and imposing teen with dark eyes and black hair that spikes out at the back from underneath his bandana-styled hitai. He wears the red Iwagakure uniform, which has both its sleeves and accentuates it with a yellow scarf which he wraps around his neck. He also has large cheeks and a plump nose, which give him an overall look of constant joviality. Naruto looked over to Lee as the boy looked at the scrolls in his hands. Has she learned a style? Naruto asked him as Lee looked over and nodded. When she reached the tower only a few hours after you, she hit the library to find a kenjutsu style and found the Kokyuho, Lee said as Artemis and Naruto looked at him. Then looked down at Tenten. What is it? He asked them. Tenten may have found her perfect style, Naruto said as Lee's eyes shot wide, but she must start with the sun and go from there. Naruto said as Artemis nodded as Lee looked in with a question on his face. What do you mean? He asked Naruto, who looked at the boy. I know Kokyuho myself, but I only know the basics, Naruto told Lee, who nodded. But when you learn Kokyuho, you always start with Hai no Kokyu, Naruto said as Artemis nodded. I was able to master both Mizu no Kokyu and Tsuki no Kokyu, Artemis said as Kurenai's eyes shot wide, but I could not even try to use the other 10 styles as it would not match my style of fighting, the moon goddess explained to her former student. So, Lee, what else do you know? Guy asked his student, who looked at him. Tenten also wants to make her own style and change Naruto-san once more, Lee said as Guy nodded, and I would like to spar against Naruto as well, he admitted as Naruto looked over to Lee with a raised brow. Really? Naruto asked him as Lee nodded. Then if we do not fight in this exam, I accept your challenge, he said to Lee, who smiled widely. Both of them then turned to the match as both Tenten and Akatsuchi were in the middle. Hayate looked between them as Akatsuchi smiled at Tenten. I hope we have a nice match, he told her as Tenten nodded with a smile before she looked at Naruto. Naruto looked at her and nodded. Tenten turned back to her opponent with her katana ready as Naruto looked at Tenten with his Kanbunshoku haki to have a look at her and saw that her aura was taking the form of a sun. Begin, Hayate called out as Akatsuchi went through 4 hand seals and then a wall of earth from out of the ground in front of him and blocked Tenten from him. But she did not care because as soon as Hayate called, Tenten closed her eyes and took hold of her sword. She took a breath in and then breathed out. Air in, air out, air in, hot air out, air in, white smoke out, air in, steam out. Akatsuchi then ran through the wall with segments of the wall over him as Tenten raised her sword as flames gathered on the outside of it. She then moved to the side as Akatsuchi barred past her, and she did an overhead arching slash with a blazing sword. The flaming blade moved through the stone that covered Akatsuchi and started to dry and crack as the blade cut through. Sensei, isn't that Suna Kunoichi asked the man beside her. She has teal eyes and sandy blonde hair, which is gathered into 4 consecutive pigtails. Her outfit consisted of a long-sleeved purple blouse under a gray top, a dark blue skirt, and a longer sash arranged in a bow, in addition to incorporating fishnet worn over her legs, specifically on her right calf and her left thigh. She also wore her black Hittite around her neck, and on her back was a large metal folding fan. The man she was talking to was Suna Jonin, whom Hiruzen spoke to. He's a very tall man with 2 distinctive, red markings on the right side of his face, the only visible part of his head, with the rest being covered by his turban-like headgear and by a sheet hanging from it on the left side of his face, and he dons the standard attire of a Suna nin, complete with a Hittite and flak jacket. Yes, Tamari, that is short release, but that girl is not using it like Pakura does, he told her as the now-named Tamari looked confused. You see, Akashi left something out when she was explaining that Kenjutsu style, he told her. What do you mean, sensei? Kankuro asked him as the youngest of the team looked over as well. The Kokyuho calls on the elements so the strikes gain more power, he told them as 2 of his students nodded, and so with Hino Kokyu being that of the sun and thus calls on scorch release, he added as they nodded. So now that Iwa Nin's rock armor is getting too brittle, Tamari said as she saw the rock armor fall from Akatsuchi. Tenten's body seemed to relax as Naruto saw the sun turn to a calm sea. Akatsuchi turned around in time to see that Tenten had shifted her stance and crossed her arms while holding her sword before going for a concentrated horizontal slash that generated water that both cut through the front part of his armor and soaked the rock. That was the first form of Mizu no Kokyu, Artemis said as she looked over Tenten before taking in parts of her before turning to Guy. You good as she when it comes to weapons? The goddess asked him as Guy looked shocked. Hiruzen, shocked by the question, asked, why? Because if I'm right, Tenten may be like Naruto and is my half-niece, Artemis said as Hiruzen's eyes shot wide as he seemingly teleported over to Artemis before forming a seal so that only the Konoha ninja could hear the conversation. So her mother is like you, a goddess? Hiruzen asked as those that did not know looked either confused or shocked. Artemis nodded at him. Yes, and by looking at Tenten, it is either one of the 2 twins of war, Artemis said as Guy looked confused. What do you mean? He asked before his eyes shot wide, and he sank to his knees. I mean, what do you mean Kushina-sama? Guy asked. Naruto's eyes gained a little bit of math in them as the people looked shocked. Except for Sakura and Kurenai. Mom is the goddess of the hunt, the moon, animals, forests, archery, childbirth, maiden girls, radiance and the wild, and is one of the 3 virgin goddesses of the Greek pantheon, he told them as they looked confused, and my mother's name is either Artemis or Diana, Naruto said before Sakura turned to him. What do you mean? She asked him. Ages ago, a civilization called Rome came about, and so they adopted the Greek gods, but they gained a new personality and some new domains, Naruto explained. Artemis' eyes became hard as she looked at her son. Naruto, she said as her voice was colder. Naruto turned to her. Yes, Mom, he asked her. Why must you tell them that I ageist so that I must shift over? Diana asked as everyone looked amazed. Yes, I am Diana, the other side of Artemis, and the domain that was added was woodlands, she said as she turned back to Artemis as her eyes lost the hardness. Hiruzen looked amazed before he shook his head. You said something about the twins of war, he asked Artemis, who looked at him. Who does she live with? Artemis asked as Neji and Lee looked at each other before returning to Artemis. She lives with her father, Lee said as she nodded. Then it's possibly my half-sister Enyo or her Roman counterpart is Bellona, Artemis said as a cough was heard next to Artemis. Everyone turned to see another woman standing next to Artemis. She had short black hair in a pixie cut with blue highlights, pure spirit white eyes of the damned that died in the war, and a crazy sinister smile. Her body is military-like, with a lean figure and strong biceps, and she was dressed in a purple crop leather jacket for women with silver fur around the neck, and a black crop top with a symbol of anarchy on it, black gloves over her hands, a shot purple and black skirt along with fishnets and biker boots, and at her side was a baseball bat. Naruto saw her, and his eyes shot wide, and he sank to the floor on his knee. "Lady Enyo," Naruto said as the other Konoha ninja did the same, but they also saw something on Naruto's face that shocked them. Fear. Enyo looked over at the Konoha ninja and waved her hand. "You may raise mortals," she told them as they all stood up. "And you guess right, Tenten is my daughter," Enyo said as she looked over the match as Tenten shifted stances once more. Artemis looked at Enyo with a raised brow. "Are you going to claim her?" she asked the war goddess. Enyo looked over to Naruto and looked at him with narrowed eyes before turning to Artemis. "I'll tell you after you tell me why you have not claimed your son," Enyo asked her. Naruto looked at her confused before he rolled up his sleeve to show his arm. "Lady Enyo," Naruto said as the war goddess turned to him and saw his arm. "My mother is both Artemis and Diana, and so to keep me safe from my grandfather Diana claimed me and mom told me she'll claim me at Camp Half-Blood," Naruto told her as Enyo looked at Artemis for confirmation. And with Artemis nodding, Enyo laughed and slapped Naruto on the back a few times. "Ha ha ha. Oh, I like you, kid," Enyo said to Naruto as the demigod felt his back click from hard she slapped his back. "And if I did claim her as my daughter, Ares will be a to her," Enyo told Artemis, who sighed and nodded. Guy, looking confused, turned to her. "What do you mean, Enyo-sama?" he asked the war goddess. "My twin brother is a to both mine and his own daughters, and before he claims his, they must prove that they deserve to be a daughter of Ares," Enyo said as she rolled her eyes. "But when I have a daughter, and I claim them, he desired to personally give them a quest to prove that they can be his niece," she said before scoffing as she looked down at the field in time to see Tenten sheathing her katana, then redraws it and performs a singular horizontal slash following a crescent shape, creating numerous chaotic crescent blades along its path, before sheathing it once more. "This here is why I'm happy. Why I have Apollo as my twin," Artemis muttered as Enyo glared at her. "But you did not answer my question," the moon goddess asked the war goddess. Enyo lost the savage smile as she looked down at her daughter as the crescent wave that Tenten sent out hit Akatsuchi and got rid of his armor before he formed a few seals and a stone golem, one like what Karen called out, formed out of the ground and loomed over Tenten. "Yes, I will claim her, but I ask you one thing, son of Artemis," Enyo said before turning to Naruto, who nodded. "Join her on her quest and make sure that she comes back alive," she asked as Naruto looked at her and saw that in her glowing golden eyes was the care that his mother held for him, but it was for Tenten. Tenten raised her katana above her head as she recalled the attack that Naruto used against her with the wolf. But she could not call on a wolf. No, she called on something just as powerful. "Yabanarashi, Bofu," Tenten called out, and she brought her sword down and, as a bait of chakra, shot out of her katana and traveled across the ground and cut through the golem. The chakra wave moved past Akatsuchi and looked at Tenten with wide eyes before raising his hands. "I surrender," he called out. Hayate walked over as he looked up to the observation area to see Enyo looking down. He raised a hand. "The winner of this match is Tenten of Konoha," he called out as her team started clapping. "Well done, Tenten," Enyo said as Tenten heard her and looked up to see her mother. Tenten then blinked, and Enyo was no longer there. Hiruzen saw that Enyo had gone, nodded at Artemis, and reappeared at his chair as both ninjas walked back to their respective teams. Akatsuchi got back to his team as they looked at him while two of them patted him on the back, saying that he would do better next time. The last one berated him. Here are his teammates. The first was a very tall teen, dressed heavily armored, wearing red armor that covered his body and faces with only his light brown eyes. He was eyebrowless showing, and his armor extended all the way to the bottom half of his face, covering it up, and he wore a white cloth which also covered both sides of his face and the top of his head. Aside from his red armor, he also wore a red cassock over the white cloth, which seemed to be composed of the same material as his armor, and he wore his Iwagakure Hitai on a black cloth, and over his armor, the Iwa Genin wore a black gi, with the sleeves seemingly torn off, and black gloves, and around his neck he wore what seems to be a bronze-colored ring around his neck. Also, the armor covering his arms, legs and torso was plated. The next one was the Jonin sensei of the team, who had red hair, a mustache and a beard that tapered off to a point. He wore a large headpiece consisting of a three-pointed crown-like ridge, bearing both his Iwagakure Hitai, a ring, and a prominent black piece of armor running across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose. He wore a long-sleeved magenta kimono shirt and pants, a mesh armor shirt and fitted black suit underneath, and calf-length sandals, and around his waist, he wore a brown sash that held a brown armor-like with a pouch in the front, a brown back plate on the back that was connected to the show with mesh armor, and armored lapels falling to the sides. Then there was the kunoichi of the team, who had short, black hair and distinctly pink eyes, which were accentuated by her eyelashes running upwards at the corners. She wears the standard attire of the Iwa Nin, consisting of a red uniform with her right sleeve missing and a lapel over her right leg, fishnet tights and a skirt over them. She also wears regular shinobi sandals and a pair of gloves. Rayleigh Akatsuchi, you lost to a tree hugger, she asked him as Akatsuchi as Sensei shook his head with a small smile. While I would not have said not, you did well with fighting someone that uses the Kokyu Ho, he told him as Akatsuchi nodded. I myself would not fare much better than you would have, he added as Iwa Kunoichi's eyes shot wide. Rayleigh Roshi Sensei? She asked him. Yes, Kuretsuchi, as when I fought both the Akashi and the Shiarashi, and I still have the scars, Roshi told her as he showed his arm, and her team saw a long scar going up his arm. The Akashi did that? Kuretsuchi asked as she looked at the scar, but Roshi shook his head. No, her one was on my back. This one Shiarashi did, and well as he was her father, Roshi said as both Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi gulped. Roshi looked over to his armored student as he looked at the red-haired Suna ninja. What is it, Han? Roshi asked him. The Ikibi Jinchuriki is slowly becoming unhinged with each passing moment that he is not fighting, Han said as Roshi looked over and winced as both Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi looked over but could not see anything. What do you mean? Cuz, Kuretsuchi asked Han. As Roshi and I are Jinchuriki, we can tell if one of our siblings is off the deep end, Han said as Kuretsuchi widened, and even though Roshi and I are not liked in the village, we are not attacked like what Suna does to him, Han told her. What do you mean? Akatsuchi asked. Suna goes out of its way to try and kill its Jinchuriki, Roshi said as Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi looked sick. And with how their seal work if worse than shit, the Jinchuriki is practically insane, he added as Han nodded. And our siblings have taken note as well, Han said as Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi looked around. The first was two Kumo ninjas. The first was one of three Kumo kunoichi who had long, straight, blonde hair bound with taut bandages and dark eyes and wore red lipstick. She wore a short-sleeved black and purple blouse and black pants, both of which had a design similar to clouds, purple fingerless gloves and a chain of blue beads wound around her left hand, and she also wore the standard Kumogakure Hitai, sandals and a kunai holster strapped to her right thigh, and on her arms and legs she wore bandages and a red belt around her waist. Then there was the Kumo sensei. He has dark skin with a muscular build, as well as white hair and a goatee, and on his right shoulder, he has a tattoo of the kanji for iron, and on his left cheek, he has a tattoo of a bull's horn, and his top lip also has a slightly darker hue than his bottom one. He wore oval-shaped sunglasses and a white-colored Hittite with his village's standard one-strap over one shoulder flak jacket, with a yellowish trim, and a long, red rope belt tied around his waist, the traditional kumo hand and shin guards, shinobi sandals, and a white scarf around his neck, and he carries 7 swords on his back. Both were looking over to Suna Jinchuriki, with the female Jinchuriki looking ready to fight him while her sensei looked prepared to grow to his tailed beast tails. Next was the Kiri Jinchuriki. The first was the Kunoichi, whose attire consisted of a black, backless, sleeveless undershirt and black stretch pants, a white crop jacket with a high collar, which covers the lower part of her face downward while bearing a good portion of the lower half of her, and the jacket has a zipper running along its entire length, which is opened from the bottom upwards, that has beige air filters on either side just below the trim. The jacket's sleeves completely envelop her arms, terminating in black glove-like extensions at her extremities, resembling the appearance of a cat's paw. She had long, messy brown hair, 3 braided locks, and brown eyes. A large red sash around her waist and a Kiri Hittite sewed into the left sleeve of her jacket. On her head are some goggles, and she has thigh-length boots. Then the Kiri sensei, a tall, thin young man with pale golden eyes and brown hair that reaches to his shoulders with very narrow eyes, and the side parting let a large portion of his bangs cover the left side of his face. He wore a full-body gray suit and a variant of the village's flak jacket with very low shoulder guards, a zipper, and a pouch on the upper right chest. He also wore the village's Hittite, fingerless gloves, and bandages on his forearms. Around his waist, he had an orange sash, and at his side, he had a bamboo jug with a pipe. The kunoichi looked at the Suna nin, and while the Iwa ninja did not know what she said, her team turned to the Suna Jinchuriki, and the ones with the swords got ready while the sensei shook his head. Fu also looked over to the Suna nin. Her face had changed as she spoke to her team, smiling all day. But now she had a frown on her face. Then there was Naruto, whose eyes turned purple as he looked at the Suna ninja. Back over with the Konoha ninja, and when Tenten had returned to her side, she was asked by the Hokage to meet her in his office along with Naruto and their sensei. After a while, the next 2 names were picked out. Chojuro of Kiri versus Zaku Abumi. Naruto looked down at the Oto ninja. He bit into a lion before looking over to the now named Chojuro. Chojuro has short, tufty blue hair and dark eyes. From what Naruto could see, he had pointed shark-like teeth. He wore square, black-rimmed glasses connected to ear protectors, a blue pin-striped shirt and camouflage pattern pants. He wears his Hittite on the front of his holster, which he uses to carry his sword. That sword has a wide, flat blade with 2 curved indentations near its base, creating a sort of cross-guard with 2 handles connected to one another by a short length of cord, and the overall sword looks like a flounderfish in shape. When not in use, Haramakare is wrapped in bandages, and it was on his back, leaving only the double hilt visible. He also has shuriken holsters strapped onto each of his legs. Both of them walked down, and Naruto saw that Zaku had broken arms. Naruto raised a brow and looked over to Sakura. "Didn't I only break one of his arms?" he asked Sakura, who nodded as Kakashi looked confused. "I was separated from the team, and when I rejoined them, I used an ability that I got from Mom to turn into a lion and from Zaku's left arm," Naruto told him as Kakashi nodded and looked down. Kakashi narrowed his eyes as he looked at Zaku for a while. "It looks like he's faking it," Kakashi told them as Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at Zaku. "How can you tell?" Naruto asked as Hayate stood between them. "Look at his right arm and tell me what you see," Kakashi said as Naruto and Sakura looked down as the match started. "He's moving his right hand," Sakura said as Kakashi nodded. "The arm is not deformed," Naruto added for her as Kakashi nodded once more. "Yep, And that is only a small part of what you told me about your mother's domains. So I have to ask, do you have hunter's eyes? Kakashi said. Then asked Naruto, who nodded. If you look at him, you can see slight tremors from him over his left arm, but none from his right, Kakashi added as Naruto looked at Zaku and saw that Kakashi was right. His left arm is slightly swollen, as you can see, and you can tell that his arm is slightly bleeding, Artemis added from Kakashi, who nodded as Naruto narrowed his eyes at Zaku and saw there was a bit of blood seeping through Zaku's arm. Zaku moved his arms as he moved his arms to point at Chojuro. Zenkaha! Zaku yelled out as he sent out chakra, sound waves and airwaves from his hands. Now, his right hand sent the triple mix of chakra, sound waves and airwaves that shot out at Chojuro, while his left arm exploded off his arm. Naruto had not only broken it when he was a lion, but he somehow locked the hole and made it so that it blocked the chakra going to the hole in his hand. When the arm exploded with nothing left, the bone splintered, and flesh and blood spread to the floor. Sakura looked away and hid her eyes in Naruto's chest as Hinata closed her eyes. Chojuro moved forward as he drew his sword and, with the flat side using it as a bat, knocked Zaku into a wall. As Zaku looked up, Chojuro had finished going thou a set of seals and had ended on the bird seal. Sweden. Daibakufu no jutsu, Chojuro called out before he expelled a large volume of water from his mouth at Zaku. The water hit Zaku, basting him into the wall once more and forcing him to close his eyes, and when he opened them, he saw that Chojuro was running at him and tried to raise his remaining arm, but Chojuro was faster. Suiro no jutsu, he called out as the water around Zaku formed into a sphere around the Otonin. Chojuro placed a hand on the sphere and looked at Zaku. Please give up, or I will use lightning release to electrocute you from within that sphere. Chojuro asked him, but Zaku moved his arm so Chojuro's hand that was on the sphere started to gain electricity and he started to shock Zaku. Chojuro cut the electricity off and asked Zaku once more, but before he could, Hayate walked over and shook his head and called out, "Winner Chojuro of Kiri," he said as Chojuro released the water sphere and Zaku raised his arm to fire a blase at the Kiri nin but Hayate at a sword to Zaku's thought. "Don't even try it," Hayate said as Zaku glared as medics came and took him away. Sakura, who had turned back to the match to see Zaku lose, took a deep breath and then let it out before turning to Naruto. "How were you okay with watching that?" she asked him. "I wasn't," Naruto told her as the Konoha nin looked at him, "but I know what this job needs, and so I knew that I need to keep a cool head," Naruto said as he looked down at Sakura. "It's not easy to do," he added as she nodded, "but it helps you deal with what we have to do in this job," he said as the older ninja nodded. After the battlefield was cleaned, the next two names were picked. Karui of Kumo versus Shizuka of Nadeshiko Village. _